podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body, which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Claudia Day, and in this new series, I'm delighted to introduce you to expert coaches and thought leaders who share their passion for generating self-awareness through insight tools. Our aim is to inspire and explore with you some of the most impactful tools available to us coaches and leaders. Hello, everyone. Today we have with us Susannah Brade-Waring. She works in leadership management development, and one of her tools that she uses is Motivational Maps, and she will be talking today to us about this. Susannah, can you share with the audience a bit of your journey and how you got here?
Absolutely. Thank you, Claudia. Yes, I'm Susannah Brade-Waring. So I'm the founder and the business motivator at Aspirin Business Solutions. We're a family business that I founded in 2008, approximately. And we're focused on helping people to thrive through their work. So we liberate leaders, we empower managers, and we motivate teams.
And of course, the topic that brings us today, motivational maps. Of course, motivation is very important for us. It's what keeps us going. Can you define for the audience which definition you use and tell us a bit more about motivation?
Absolutely. So the definition that I tend to use is the one created by James Sale, the creator of Motivational Maps, which is that motivation is the fuel that powers all of our endeavours, whether they are individual, team or organisational endeavours. And then to add on to that, the dictionary defines motivation as the desire to exert effort in pursuit of a goal. And for me, that really helps to understand motivation, because if a goal is not being achieved, what are the possible options for that? And for me, there are three key factors. One is that, do we have clarity around that goal? Do we think it's achievable? The second one, do we have the capability, which might be skills or time, resources or well-being? And the third one is the motivation. Do we think the goal is worthwhile achieving? Whilst the other two are well documented, lots of work goes into the goal setting and developing capability, then motivation is really untapped in its impact and power. And for me, it's just been the most glorious journey as a coach to use that to develop my understanding and to empower individuals and teams as well.
The desire to exert effort. And of course, in this world, we need to choose very well how we use our fuel, how we use that energy that we have, because it's not a limitless resort. How we choose those things we do. And how would a tool such as Motivational Maps help us in deciding what we exert our energy on?
I describe motivation a little bit like when we're hungry and we go in the kitchen and we're prowling around the kitchen, opening the drawers and opening the fridge, because we know we're hungry, but we don't actually know what it is that we want. So a tool like Motivational Maps helps us to be very clear about what we believe we want. And so we can then develop those strategies or be coached around how do we influence other people to help us to achieve that, or perhaps set our own goals and perhaps develop our own skills. And I emphasize the word believe there, because the other option for coaching is to explore that belief. Is that what you think you should have? Is that what you think you need from your work? Where does that come from? Is that true? And potentially, is that an old belief that you're hanging on to and you still think that's important for you, like an old wound?
Yes, of course, it's very difficult. Most of our beliefs are on our unconscious side, and it helps them to bring it forward and put light to it. So in your journey, Susannah, how did you first encounter the concept of motivation and this tool specifically about motivation?
I came into coaching and leadership management from a different background to many people, because I used to be the finance and HR director of an environmental technology business. And like many businesses, small businesses, and especially in the engineering sector, we didn't do any professional development, including leadership management. So it was all learning by trial and error. And that's quite a painful way to learn and develop your people skills and your management skills. So I tried lots of things. I put investors and people in place. We had best practice. And I tried lots of different assessments because what I really wanted to do was to understand my team, to understand, are they happy? Are they enjoying their jobs? Can I, or how much can I challenge them to reach their full potential without disengaging them and them becoming disgruntled and going off sick or leaving? And it wasn't until I found the Motivational Maps, which actually was after we had grew the business to £10 million of turnover and through management buyout. It wasn't until afterwards I discovered Motivational Maps, and it just very quickly resonated with me as a tool which would have helped me to understand the unpredictability of my team performance or behaviour. So what they might do on a Monday might be different to what they might do on a Wednesday, and therefore would enable me to understand, predict their behaviour and know how I could adapt my behaviour to bring out the best in them, or maybe to how I communicated my expectations.
So a million questions come to mind when you describe that journey towards it. But before digging further, I think it would be great for the audience to understand more about the model for them to be able to really grasp what you just shared.
Yes. So the model was created 25, 30 years ago. I've been using it now for 14 years and training and accrediting as well. And so I've used the Motivational Maps with probably thousands of individuals and then grouping those together as teams now. So the model was based on primarily 3 different tools. So the most well-known of those is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And that's such a beautiful tool in the way that it's very easy for people to understand that hierarchy of needs and to work through it almost as a checklist. It's also based upon the Enneagram, which is the world's oldest personality profile, a profile that is used still today. And it's also based on Edgar Schein's career anchors. And those anchors are that kind of driver that is enduring even when we're facing challenges. We have this internal drive towards something. And so there's a very strong link between the different motivators that are in Motivational Maps and career choices and preferences as well. Overall, there are 9 different needs and wants, as opposed to the carrot and the stick. We have a much more nuanced way of understanding and discussing motivation, 9 different motivators. And we all need all 9, but in very different quantities. And that reflects what we believe our needs and wants are at work. And the other thing to note is that it is dynamic as well. So what we find is our needs and wants at work don't change overnight, as some people might think, but actually they change fundamentally. They change when who we are as a person changes, when our self-concept changes. Now, that might be because we are going through different stages at work. So from being, let's say, an apprentice or a candidate to actually being employed, to passing that probationary period when we feel secure and we can progress our career, to then becoming a team leader, a manager, a head of department or director. Who we are at work changes. Equally, when we go through stages of life. So from being a student to needing to prove that we can afford to rent somewhere or to buy a flat or a house, our need for money will increase. When we have children, typically our need for security will increase because we need to start putting things in place and planning and having predictability. When we go through divorce, quite often I see a spike in freedom and again for money. When we go through bereavement, we'll see those foundational layers of Maslow rising, that need for more certainty and predictability, that need for more support and belonging. And when we go through retirement, again, there's more focus on money and therefore what we're looking for from work, there's an increased focus on money to make sure our retirement fund is topped up.
And for the audience, we've added in the notes some visuals so that you can follow it in more detail and you can see the 9 motivations as well. So that's very interesting how the stages in life impact us. Is there anything else that you found that impacts them to go up or down in some specific trend?
Most of what I've talked about are external factors, so things that are maybe happening to us or perhaps these stages of our career. We can develop our self-concept and coaching has a huge amount to do that. For example, one of the things that I've been very fascinated by is what is least important to me. So, of course, it's no surprise that making a difference is consistently my top motivator. It's always driven everything I've done, and it explains why I was so focused on caring for people, even though I didn't really understand people, and why I've then gone into the coaching. But the lowest motivator is fascinating because sometimes the lowest motivator is about things that we genuinely aren't interested in. Sometimes they're things that we are interested in, but our experience of them has been painful, and therefore we push them down in terms of how much we need and want them. So one example of that is the friend motivator. As a manager, it's very challenging to be friends with your team and also to be the one who's making more difficult and unpopular decisions. So it's quite common for managers to separate out that need to belong, to be liked at work, and to have these very strong boundaries. And so that is definitely one I've worked on a lot. And that was quite a surprise to me when that suddenly just became more important to me. And I felt very needy, which was not a feeling that I was familiar with in terms of needing those friendships. And I didn't have the skills because it wasn't important to me. I hadn't developed the skills around friendships and friendships at work. And I've also worked on the star motivator. I think is a fascinating one. For me, it's about feeling valued at work. So very typically, the lowest motivator out of all the motivational maps that have been done, it's very typically the lowest. It's about status. It's about being seen, putting your head above the parapet. It's about being comfortable and enjoying recognition. And many of us, again, are not taught how to do that. We fear being ridiculed or getting something wrong. I believe it is strongly associated with employee engagement because it's closely linked with employee voice, being seen, being heard, being valued for who you are, not just your qualifications or not just what you've achieved, but who you are as an individual and what you bring to the team, to the organisation, to your work as well. And of course, doing the work that we do, needing to stand in front of clients to be able to have more of an impact, i.e. to make more of a difference, we need to be comfortable having all eyes on us. So that's one of the motivators that I've really worked on and had coaching support to help me work on me being comfortable in the spotlight as well.
It's great to hear that we can work on them and proactively move them in some way.
Yes, and change our beliefs. It's really important that we change our beliefs and perhaps understand where that's come from. Is that still true? And then how can we develop these empowering beliefs? And then typically it would be in service of our higher motivators. So the star motivator is not a high motivator, but at least it's not one that I'm avoiding now.
I guess that's where the coaching is so powerful in the sense of the exploration of the beliefs within a coaching environment where it's safe and where they can do it. Because it's a lot of information to get on one session. And then, of course, it's what you do with it afterwards. You mentioned employee engagement. Why would a company, of course, they want retention and engagement and all of these things, but in your experience with companies and them using this tool, what is the biggest benefit for them and how can you bring it to life?
What I've found is primarily organizations want to do some kind of team building, team engagement activity. So maybe they have a conference where some of the material is quite dry and they want to do an activity, a workshop where the energy levels are much higher, where there's a lot of interaction, discussion, engagement, as well as it being insightful and useful. The quantity and quality of data that comes out of completing motivational maps is something perhaps that they weren't expecting because it wasn't their primary objective. But for us, in terms of making a difference as coaches, it's great for us to be able to then pass that on to the client to make sure it's in safe hands, because it reveals a lot about the individual, about the team, and to make sure that they then have the data and some knowledge to be able to support their team ongoing based upon what they have learned in the workshops.
So with these teams, do they learn their individual motivators? And do they also get to see what the team's aggregation is? Or is it a team motivation? Or how does it work with the teams in the companies?
Works at an individual, team and organisational level. There are three types of report in the motivation map that's designed for work. Individuals fill in their individual maps. Those maps, that data is collated into a team map. And if you've got a few teams, you can then collate the different teams into an organisational map. So for me, being a former finance director, it's like having a profit and loss account, is what I say, and then a group profit and loss account. And that way, it enables you to be able to look at the outliers, any teams or any individuals where the results are different to what you expect, and therefore to be able to focus your attention perhaps on those as well as seeing the overall trends. What I recommend where the budget and where time allows is that we are able to give feedback to the individuals so they understand about the concept of motivation, they understand their motivational map. We always emphasise there were no rights or wrongs. I describe it like a mirror, but actually maybe a slightly distorted mirror. I always use a picture of a child looking into a puddle and say that we're standing side by side, we're looking into this puddle, and the puddle is their motivational map. It's their reflection based on their answers of who they are, because primarily the motivational map is a self-perception inventory, like Belbin's team roles, and it's based upon their self-concept. So how accurate do they think it is? What do they recognise? What don't they recognise? Is there anything they disagree with? And I always say, don't defend the map. It's actually a tool for a conversation. So it's very rare that someone will disagree with their map, but if they do, then that means they know what does motivate them because they've said what doesn't motivate them. So that enables us then to just take the conversation further, but without relying on the map itself. But it is primarily a coaching tool.
Giving from what you described in the cases and what you've seen in your practice, a lot of the people tend to resonate with what's there. But for the ones that it doesn't resonate that much, it still gives them the language to be able to talk about something that in some way would be difficult to talk about, because we had the same with well-being, and where it's a very big concept. And this gives us a terminology through which we can talk about it in an easier way.
Exactly that. And I've certainly had incidents where the face validity is consistently extremely high, and users of the motivation map very often say it's scarily accurate. Who have you been talking to, or have you been just seeing what I'm doing? So it typically will resonate deeply with them and just make a lot of sense to them. Sometimes even where the individuals will react perhaps negatively towards the motivational map, it tells us something. So I've had a client before who didn't want their data sharing with their manager. And this could be the same for any tool, but they didn't want the data sharing with their manager. I said, obviously, I'll need to explain that to the manager. And they said then they'll want to come and find out why. And I said, so that's a conversation you need to have. And actually, so the manager instantly said they clearly don't trust me. They had a conversation, and that really strengthened their relationship because they were able to air their differences and rebuild the trust. I have really learned over these 14 years and these thousands of maps to really trust the process of it and to be able to be confident where the conversation is going and to believe in the overall purpose, which is to build those relationships, to empower people and to make a difference to people, whatever that looks like.
That was a very rich answer, and it brought me to many possible topics that we can go on to. Of course, there is the outliers that you were sharing, and that it would be lovely to hear some more anecdotes of that. There is validity that you brought up, and reliability, providing the audience a bit of sight as to what is the validity and reliability and this research that has been done and that is being done, because I understand you're still in the process. And also how to apply it as a coach and a practitioner, how to apply the tool. And finally, one that came to mind was about pigeonholing. And of course, how do you, one of the risks of these tools, and when you were saying that they didn't want to share it with a manager, and if there is, in your view, any risk of pigeonholing and how to avoid it, or any other risks that may come along. So we'll go through them slowly. Let's go first for maybe validity and reliability, if you want to share with the audience the research that has been done and that is being done.
Yes, Motivational Maps hasn't gone through some of the validity tests that some of the other profiles have done. That's a choice of the creator of Motivational Maps. And actually, it's very important for me to know that I can rely on the data being valid and being reliable, because we have to have this shared, robust framework of data and language and understanding that goes across all individuals and across teams, so that we know we're talking about the same thing and we're using the same language to mean the same thing. So that for me has always been important. I guess because I don't come from a coaching background, it wasn't the most important thing for me. For me, it's much more in the same way that I used to do the accounts. The accounts have to be robust because I want to go, what can we do with the numbers? How can we make sure the numbers are improving? How can we make sure that actually we get into the source of the accounts, the budgeting, the quoting, etc., to actually create these distinct improvements? And that's very similar to what I do with the tool. So I need a robust tool, but it's very much focused about the outcomes for the individual, that we can use that data to give them a framework to bounce off and to work with. So in terms of the validity, we know that the Motivational Maps is based on these very well-established psychological theories, and especially Maslow's hierarchy and Edgar Schein's career anchors and the Enneagram. I know the way that the questionnaire, which is called a semantic differential questionnaire, and it basically forces individuals to choose between two preferences. James Sale, who created Motivational Maps, his background actually is in education, and he was the deputy head of a large secondary school. And that's where his love of the English language and his love of trying to understand motivation, primarily in education, comes from. And that's where he was then developing tools, and again went on to become invested in People Accreditor and etc. What we know, and I have seen, is that all the motivators are then compared against each other without a left or right bias, so that each individual is forced to choose between two preferences. So, for example, do I want to be creative or do I want to be wealthy? Do I want to be safe or do I want to make a difference? And crucially, they're not allowed to choose a middle preference. They have to choose a preference for the right or the left. The way that's constructed ensures that the data capture is robust. And then there's an 8-level algorithm which is accredited to an ISO standard to make sure that provided the input is the same, then the output will be the same. So if I were to do the map or you would do the map and then straight away do the map again, so that your needs and wants, your motivators haven't changed, then your data going into it should be exactly the same. And the algorithm will make sure that the calculation coming out will be reliable. So reliability is like a set of scales that you can measure the same thing several times, and providing you haven't changed that thing, then it will weigh the same amount. So it'll accurately measure the same as well.
Thanks for that. In the notes, we'll also add more information about this. And it's great to see the current research that has been done. And we look forward to seeing what comes, because there's a lot of data that you already have collected over the years. So it's a wonderful resource.
There's a huge amount of data, you're right. So right now, there is data mining happening on over 100,000 different motivational maps. And that data mining is looking to see what trends there are in the data across industry, across roles, across gender, etc., that will help to inform us. As practitioners, we see our own trends, but that might differ depending on the kind of work we're doing, who we're working with. So it's wonderful to see this. And it is used globally, and it's also in lots of different languages as well.
Where can the audience follow this research that will be coming out?
The best way is to follow James Sale on LinkedIn. So James Sale on Motivational Maps. We actually have 2 different websites. So we have our client-facing website, which is Aspirin Business, aspirin as in the headache. And then we have a separate website, which is called Motivator Performance. And that's primarily for coaches and HR professionals and trainers, all about motivation and motivational maps. So there are updates on there as well. I'm a senior practitioner, which means that I work at the very highest level in motivational maps. There are just 7 of us globally. So we work closely with the creator and the managing director of Motivational Maps in the ongoing development of the tool as well, and then training and accrediting coaches. We obviously get early insights into what's happening and discussing these developments, but there's a gap between these early insights and robust data that we'd be comfortable in sharing. But yes, if you can also follow on there as well, and we'll give you updates.
Thank you for that. Now, with our extensive list that we still want to go through, how does a coach or how does a practitioner go about applying this tool? And I guess within this answer, we can get some anecdotes as well from your side of what you've experienced in doing so.
I believe it's really important for coaches to find tools that resonate with them, that they believe in, that they have that confidence in the validity, in the robustness, and that resonate with their clients as well. And so for me, it was Motivational Maps, although I have been trained in other tools, including personality having been a finance director, I also believe that it's important that we leverage our time because we only have so much time. And therefore, we have, in some ways, a limited ability to be able to make a difference. There's a variety of things that we can do. And using tools is one of those. What I also really like about the tool is that it means that the coachee is seeing the same document. It's their document that they created. So I'm very keen that we don't withhold that information. They receive that as soon as we do. And that the whole setup is about creating that psychological trust. It's about them understanding what it will and won't be used for, etc., and whether that information will or will not be disclosed as well to the client. And of course, I know obviously about the confidentiality of the coaching session. So for me, I use it in different ways. Because I primarily am a leadership and management development practitioner, I will use it in what I call the induction or the discovery session. So it creates a very quick way of developing rapport, of building trust, of building understanding of what's going on for the person. And how are they? Are they happy at work? What does motivate them? Maybe where are some of their frustrations and gaps? And in the way that we discuss that in a non-judgmental way, because there are no rights or wrongs within this, it's literally a coaching tool, then that facilitates this very open conversation and a very rich conversation very quickly, which then, of course, informs lots of things. So for me, being leadership management, it will give me insights as well into perhaps their preferred or default leadership and management style based on some of their motivators and the ranking and the importance, and also some of the satisfaction in that. So some of the frustration that they're experiencing as well. But it's important for me to just have that initial understanding. If you're doing a series of coaching sessions, then as you say, there's a lot of data in there. So it forms that picture where we can look at it in relation to the coachee's goals and then start to pick out those areas that we might want to work on. And because they have visibility of it as well, they have more influence to be able to say, actually, I'm curious about this one, where that one might have come from, or actually why that one is not very well satisfied. So for me, it helps to structure a series of coaching sessions as well. And then, of course, it's much easier to get into teamwork. I still prefer to understand what's going on with the team before I walk into the room. It just helps me to feel very present and comfortable and confident and that I can be there for them. And having data like Motivational Map means that I've very often met many of the people as well. I know what's going on. I know some of the key themes and topics I'm going to talk about and that the clients will have seen already because they'll have seen the data and it will resonate with them straight away. So they're just some of the examples.
Can you share a case where after you left that door, you said, oh my God, thank goodness I had Motivational Maps, or that I was in the topic of motivation?
The one that always resonates deeply with me is perhaps very early on. I hadn't been doing Motivational Maps very much. I was working with a couple of engineers and the intention was to promote them into a director management and then a leader role. And one of them, I came back after doing the Motivational Map feedback session and I said, how are you? He said, I'm great, I'm getting divorced. And it's because of the Motivational Map. So of course I gulped and was like, oh, could you say a little more? And he said, actually, it's when I looked at the Motivational Map, I realised that it is a true reflection of who I am. And I like who I am. And it's clear that actually my wife doesn't, I don't want to change. So that for me that's the importance of having a really robust, valid, and obviously the coaching conversation, the client's understanding around it, because it's a big responsibility when you're coaching and when you're developing people. Our first motto is a bit like the first aid of do no harm. But actually that person then went on to become much more confident in himself. He went on to become a director, a shareholder, remarried. When I last met him, he'd got several children, I think maybe 4 children. It seemed to be a pivotal point for him. I've also seen in the Motivational Maps where it's substantially helped. There's so many individuals where it substantially helped them to have a better understanding of themselves, of what's going on at work, to be able to have that reflection and then to be able to see, is that true or not? There was one yesterday and a couple yesterday, actually, I was doing a workshop for the YMCA and one of them looked at the results and was going, I don't understand what this means. And having just had a quick chat with her about it, she could see that she has some very disempowering beliefs that aren't grounded in the truth. And that seeing it on paper, which is what often people say, when they see it reflected on paper or on the document, enables them to look into that mirror and go, is that true? Is that what's happening? Or actually, is that just my anxiety and my concern that's just telling me these things? So it just gives a reflection. And yesterday as well, in looking at the team results. And when I work with a team, I would typically take off the name and the motivation score. So we're just looking at the trends in data so that individuals can see where they are similar to each other, the overall trends in the team, and perhaps where there are contrasts, and therefore where people, depends on the role and how it's managed, that emotional intelligence, where there's potential for conflict. So there's an individual yesterday whose motivators are quite different to the rest of the team. And so we're able to have a really good quality conversation. And it can be a little bit hairy at times, but having the data, having had that one-to-one with the individual, having had the conversation with the team manager, we knew that actually it was the right person in the right seat, and the motivators fitted very well with that. The management style worked very well with that. So actually it was about helping the team and the individual to be able to appreciate differences as evidenced by the motivational map, and to recognise perhaps that they're not unbiased either. So if it's one of their lowest motivators, one of their least preferred motivator for some reason, of course they're going to have a dissonance when it's somebody else's highest motivator. It's like when you dislike a food and somebody else loves it and you're like, what? How does that work? Like, why would you ever? And when we see motivators that are very different to ours, we don't necessarily understand the benefits to the team of someone bringing that motivator into it and how it will therefore influence their work and the team.
I guess in this case, it was something that was used to work together and bring the biases up front and also recognize the strength in it. Here I go back to pigeonholing. Is there a risk, or how can a coach manage the risk of one of the users being pigeonholed because of their results and them maybe wanting to change one of their motivations and them being pigeonholed or restrained from doing so because of the tasks that will be provided?
Good question. So with the motivational maps, because there are the 9 motivators, and in the ranking through the questionnaire, we end up with over 1 million different combinations. So as well as having the motivators in different rank orders, each one then has a strength on a scale of 0 to 40. And so with that combination, if you're going to pigeonhole, there's 1 million different pigeonholes, right? And equally, because we're saying there are no rights or wrongs, have a look at it. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? We're adding the individual's understanding of that motivator, of maybe where it's coming from, how it applies to them, and then to be able to say, is that true or not? So they may not like some of the wording, but if they understand the concept of it. So for example, I was talking to someone who has director as their top motivator. And the initial reaction was a little bit like, oh, so this is saying I'm very hierarchical and micromanage. And they're not the words actually in the report. That's an interpretation. So I was able to explain actually it's being energized by being in authority, by having influence, by being able to make decisions, by having responsibility over people and resources. Does any of that resonate with you? And then he was very comfortable with that. And what I also explained is what the motivational map can tell us is how motivated you are by each of these. What it doesn't tell us is how skilled you are at each of these, and also your level of emotional intelligence. For example, in the conversation I was just talking about where there was one individual whose motivators were quite different, that actually was with a direct motivator being very high for, it was a top motivator of one individual, the second lowest, i.e. the 8th most important for the rest of the team. So very different. And being able to explain that and explain the skill that would need to sit around that motivator to be able to manage in the appropriate way for the culture of the organisation, as well as for the performance. And also saying that skill level applies to every single motivator. So if we're there making a difference, and we need to learn the skills to manage our boundaries, we need to learn the skills to be able to work on ourselves first, so that we can be fully present and be unconditional in the way that we give people time and attention and listen and hear and support their needs. So we need training in all these motivators. But of course, depending on our preferences, we're going to have our own certain biases towards them as to which ones are better or worse. And that's not true. It's actually about the behaviour and the outcomes.
So how do you work with the managers? Because the managers receive the reports from the people in their team. How do you work with them to give the interpretation to it? So, for example, if I'm being considered for a promotion, but my director is very low, how could I avoid that they don't decide not to promote me because I'm not motivated by leadership?
Great question. So let's just take a step back, because we actually do use motivational maps in recruitment, which I know some of the tools aren't used in that way. We always say we never make a recruitment decision purely on an assessment tool. It has to be part of the recruitment interview questions, just to understand more about the person. The fact that you have perhaps rated and ranked director as your lowest motivator, i.e. how much you enjoy being in charge, how much you enjoy responsibility, doesn't mean that you don't have those skills. But it is likely to influence how you apply those skills and how you might react in certain situations as well. And then depending on your other motivators, let's say you've got friend, which is about belonging, much higher up. The hypothesis will be that you will want to have a much more collaborative, co-creating way of managing your team, which might be appropriate, might not be appropriate. So there are questions then to be asked around that. And ultimately, we want people to be in the right seats, because if you go for a job and a promotion where you're required to behave in a certain way, which is inauthentic to you, either because you have a self-concept which jars with the concept of who you need to be, or because you don't have the capability, and of course those two things are aligned, then you are not going to thrive in that job. You will try to pretend to be someone that you aren't, and that's going to affect all the relationships, including your relationship with yourself. What I have found really fascinating is just that, and that included myself, helping people to reinterpret motivators which perhaps have been looked on unfavourably. So director is not about micromanagement. It's not about hierarchy. We do need people who will take responsibility for others, for making decisions. And we absolutely need leaders. And we need people with the values that we value, the positive regard, the genuineness, the respect, all of those qualities, that co-creation, the listening to people's opinions. We need people like that in decision-making positions, because if they don't step up into those, then somebody else who perhaps doesn't share those qualities and those values will. So it's really important that we encourage and we re-educate by shifting beliefs and shifting our language around what it means to lead and what it means to be a manager, and how you can be the kind of manager that you are proud to be and want to be, and do that with authenticity, whilst also still holding people to account, creating explicitness and providing really clear and just-in-time feedback as well.
You talk a lot about changing beliefs and the importance of understanding what it is they want, where they want to go, and then working on the beliefs. So can you share with us some coaching questions that are useful in terms of exploration of these beliefs?
When I go into beliefs, it would depend on why I'm having that conversation with that coachee and whether they're expecting to go deeper into their beliefs as well and what their goals are. Some of the questions that I might ask is that true? There was an example recently of somebody whose friend was their lowest motivator. And when I asked about were there any surprises in your results, she mentioned that one and said it wasn't a surprise, but it was. So I asked her for a bit more about that. She said, actually, I used to be close friends with people at work, but then that became very painful and just became incredibly difficult. So now I avoid friendships at work. So we just explored a little bit around going, so what does that mean for you? What does that mean for your relationships at work? How do you have boundaries? How do you maintain those boundaries? And if there's a belief that you are perhaps unsafe or you can't do your job at work whilst being friends, is that always true? So it's just, I think I'm just very intuitive in the moment in terms of just, and depending on the language they're using as to the questions that I would ask. That one of the concepts that came up with co-creator for her is just maybe putting some doors in the wall that she's built around her friendships, which means that she can be selective in who she allows in and the people who will respect those boundaries, and that she is there primarily for work and her work is her way of making a difference.
It sounds like our key question here is the why.
And we have to be also very gentle with the why. Yes, there's some questions to go, do you have an understanding of where that comes from, perhaps that belief? And what we don't want people to feel is that if we haven't built the trust and if they haven't contracted go that deep, that we don't go that deep too early. We also have to be very conscious about staying in our expert stream and not going into counselling. So I am a qualified mental health first aider, because what I found with a motivational map is that there would be data and there'd be some words individuals would drop in the conversation, but I didn't want to pick them up because I didn't believe I knew enough to not do harm. So I then went and became mental health first aider, so that I'm not afraid of those conversations and I can signpost people to where they need to go without going into the counselling part, because that's not what we'd agreed I would do.
Can you share with the audience your journey into becoming a first aid mental health?
I can, because I believe in motivational maps, because it's my go-to tool. If there are some things that happen that I wasn't expecting or the manager wasn't expecting, then I would always go back to the motivational map and go, is there anything in the data that could have predicted what happened? And there's some things around recruitment around that. But in this case, there were one organisation, a couple of individuals whose behaviour, subsequent behaviour, demonstrated that their mental health was in a very negative place. That did not show up on the data that we looked at with the motivational map. I had trained the HR practitioner inside the organisation, so I only looked at the motivational maps that really flagged as concerns and some of the leaders, and they were looking at the rest. But motivation level was high. It didn't look as concern. When I went back, the importance of all their motivators was exactly the same, i.e. their desire to lead was the same as to innovate, as to belong, as to feel secure, as to create. And when we have a very low range of importance between their highest motivator and their lowest, it can indicate that they have lost their sense of identity. They don't know who they are anymore. So that can be, for me, an own indication of perhaps a concern that they're negative, their mental health will become less healthy and more negative. And that's why I then went, okay, I'm now going to go and become a mental health first aider, as did the HR practitioner as well.
If you were to point the audience to a place where they can find out more about mental health aider, what would you recommend they read or look at?
The Mental Health First Aid England, there are loads of resources on there. So just having an understanding, I think it's called a continuum mental health, where there are 4 different levels, and just understanding there is a continuum, that there are times when people need to go and seek professional advice as well, and perhaps seek a diagnosis. There are tools like the stress bucket, which I love. And so I'll also incorporate some of these tools into the workshops that I do, because I believe it's very important that we normalise the conversations about mental health and recognising that we all have our good and bad days. We all have coping strategies, and that some of those coping strategies can become unhealthy as well. And of course, mental health is part of our capability, is part of the contribution to our performance, and will have an impact on motivation, but we have an insight into it, seemingly via the motivational maps. That's just something that I look out for.
Thank you for that. Is there anything else that you want to share with the audience today?
Maybe one last point on that with the mental health is, what are some of the triggers where someone's needs might become irrelevant to them and unequal, or perhaps where they're caring for somebody else and they're literally putting somebody else's needs first, or where they're adapting. So I've also had individuals who maybe have sold their business and they're trying to adapt themselves to be what the bigger organisation wants them to be. So they're losing their sense of self. And also somebody who was in a temporary role, so either building a hotel, who's in a temporary role, but then planning permission took a long time, COVID took a long time, and they were losing their sense of who they are because they were very much focused on doing tasks that weren't motivating them and trying to do them well. But actually it was really having a real impact on their well-being, their sense of identity, their motivation, etc. For me, I think emotional intelligence is where I would always go to this. So I always use that model of emotional intelligence. I use the model with the 4 boxes and of self-awareness. I believe self-awareness is so important for us, and that self-management or self-regulation. And it takes us to a place where we can use the quotation by Maya Angelou. Her definition of success is success when we like ourselves, when we like what we do, we like how we do it. And when we can get to a place where we understand who we are, we like who we are, we respect ourselves, we trust ourselves, we can then focus so much more on other people because we've dealt with a lot of our own stuff. and we can be a lot kinder to ourselves as well and recognise we're work in progress. So for me, this is all part of emotional intelligence. And typically emotional intelligence, that self-awareness, is when we meet someone that's similar to us and we start to recognise some of the traits, some of the behaviours, which is lovely. Or we come into contrast or conflict with someone who's different to us. And that's a very painful way of understanding who we are and is that valid, is that okay or not? Whereas a profile and assessment tool is a less painful and for many people an enjoyable way of having a reflection on themselves they can look at and go, is that true? I really promote curiosity. So to be curious about it, to explore it, to see where it might be influencing their choices, their behaviours, their thoughts, their beliefs, etc. Not necessarily in that order. So you go beliefs, thoughts, feelings, actions, and then to explore who they are, to then be able to start to manage and regulate themselves because there are tasks that none of us like doing, which we might avoid. So how can we motivate ourselves a bit more to be able to do it? How can we make it just feel more achievable? How perhaps we can add in some of the things that we enjoy, that bit of variety, a bit of music, all sorts of things. And equally, when we're perhaps overdoing something that really motivates us, and we need to recognise we're perhaps putting too much energy, too much time, that is warranted, but equally that is good for our own physical well-being, that we don't collapse on the settee afterwards because we're exhausted. And then, of course, once we understand ourselves better, when we're less being triggered far less, we're more able to really understand other people's needs and wants, perhaps their thoughts, their feelings, their beliefs, and be much more present and meet them where they're at. I think as a manager and a director, I used to try to get people to meet me where I was at and to encourage them to hurry up. And what I've really learned as a coach, and especially through Motivational Maps and the huge amount I've learned about emotional intelligence and really playing with the motivators, is the importance of meeting people where they're at and understanding them and understanding what's important to them and seeing where the alignment is between their needs and my needs or the organisation's needs. So we're working together and we're co-creating together as well. And of course, that means we're much more able to influence them for all the right reasons.
And this gives a bit of a feel of how big this topic is.
Huge.
In the sense of, with that last remark, it was almost like I need to replay it and listen to it again because there's so much in it that we could, of course, continue talking. And so thank you so much for giving us a window into this huge topic of motivation and emotional intelligence at the end. We do have an episode which we'll put in the notes about emotional intelligence from one of our fellow coaches who did an episode on it. Where can people contact you to hear more and learn more about this?
Probably the easiest place is on LinkedIn. So they can look me up on LinkedIn, Susannah Brade-Waring. We have a newsletter as well for the client side, the Aston business side. I think we're going to start a newsletter as well soon on the motivated performance side, which is we have a newsletter right now for our practitioners, but not for people who are just generally interested in Motivational Maps. And of course, they can, guess the easy way is probably just through LinkedIn, message me from there and get in touch. Let's have a chat. It's always motivating to talk with coaches because they get it and they're energized and optimistic and curious, and we share a common purpose.
Yes, and we love learning about all these topics. Thank you so much for today, and for all other details, the audience can check the notes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Claudia.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make sustainable differences to individuals, organizations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our website at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, member benefit interviews, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching experience.